Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining me today. It's Allan Laboucan with the Rocks and Stocks News Show, and I've got another of our interviews with those that are involved with the with junior mining company exploration stories. And one of those companies that I'm very bullish on is Dynasty Gold. And when I look at a project and see exceptionally high grade, like they reported in January, a 3-meter intersection of 151 grams per ton of gold with a 246 grammer in there over 1.5 meters. Then I try to figure out, well, what am I looking at from a geological perspective, and what's the chances of that getting bigger? And I've formulated my answers and thoughts on it. But, you know, it's always nice to be able to get a guy like Jim Rogers on the line who has spent a lot of time in Red Lake looking at these kind of rocks to sort of help my audience understand what he thinks of the project. So, Jim, thank you very much for coming on the show today and talk about Dynasty Gold's Thundercloud project.
Well, thanks for the opportunity.
Well, you know, let's start with your experience in Red Lake, which is, as the crow flies, maybe 100 kilometers from Dryden, where Thundercloud is. Why don't you give us some insights? You spent a long time with Goldcorp as an exploration manager, so you've seen these kind of rocks before.
Yeah, I mean, I started off in mining. Actually started in Pickle Lake at the Terry mine, base metals, which was kind of neat because you could see structures there in the copper that you can't see in gold. You kind of have to imagine the silicification sometimes. But so I started off as a mine geologist. So 80 to 94, I was shortly chief geologist. I think by 96, I was chief geologist there. So I was basically an underground mine geologist, mapping, doing grade control, learning to understand the ore body. And you know, mapping is the key to understand. And when you're doing it in 3D, you actually start to think in 3D. You know, my memory, I can remember numbers in 3D space from years ago, and I think I can remember the name of somebody I worked with. It's kind of funny that way. But yeah, so I started off mostly in mining, and then I went to Eskay Creek. I was there for 9 years as chief geologist most of the time, and that was fun because I learned a lot about metallurgy and that sort of thing. We got a mill going with a bunch of metallurgical testing, so that was again part of the education of a geologist, is understanding how important metallurgy is to your projects. And then I went back to Campbell Mine. The manager basically solicited me to come back. They're having some issues, and I guess I'm considered an arm waver and a visionary, and that's kind of how I approach a lot of these things. Is, you know, what is it? What do we think we know? What might it be? And I mean, that's kind of how I learned a lot. So while I was there the second time, I was mostly exploration manager for the area. And we actually ran a number of programs and partnerships with other junior companies as well. So that taught me a lot as well, working with some really good companies that, again, very technical and very scientific. It's like any job, you know, the science is fun. Sometimes the people are a little bit harder to deal with, but, you know, I've actually learned a lot on that end too.
Yeah.
You know, looking at the stuff, I mean, I was looking at the core. So when I came back up here and started looking at the core.
For Dynasty.
For Dynasty, yeah.
Right.
And looking at it, you know, the alteration, it's not identical, but it's very similar. And I think that's basically what it is. You've got an Archean system, a hydrothermal system. It's got deep roots. And, you know, I've done some structural analysis. Sometimes it looks like scribbling when I'm doing it, but basically you're looking for cracks and what direction they're moving and what sort of things might happen. So I think I've shown you this before, but if you've got a crack and that's moving beside it's going to open up into an ore body, that kind of a thing. So very much about mechanisms. I like to use the, you know, you've got a source, you've got transport, and you've got traps. And that works for oil, it works for everything. And I think it works very well for Archean gold deposits.
Right. And for those that are not the geologists out there, but I've got geologists and non-geologists in the audience, Jim, those cracks you're talking about are deep crustal cracks that allow the fluids that carry gold or other metals to make their way up closer to surface. And then when you see alteration, you know that those fluids have interacted and chemically altered the rock that you're looking at. And then, of course, you need the high-grade mineralization like Thundercloud has exhibited. So when you're talking about those main big cracks and the secondary cracks and the deep source, that reminds me a lot of orogenic gold systems.
No, exactly. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, there may be some epithermal reaction with seawater near the surface, but I think that's already gone. So it's pretty much all hydrothermal, orogenic activity that's formed the ore body.
So in the context of an orogenic gold system, you need to tick off some boxes. One of those is that you need to be in the right age of rock, your greenstone belt. Then you need these cracks, and oftentimes it's pretty complex cracks that make up these kind of systems. That alteration helps target where you should be looking. And of course, when you get the high grade to Bonanza-grade mineralization, you kind of ticked off all the key boxes.
Yeah, when you find high grade like that, you want to focus in on it a little bit so that you understand the structural geometries. Early in my career at Dickinson, I wrote a paper. I actually found a sample in a stope underground, cut it, and it looked exactly like the district, only like ore bodies were visible gold in this case. So it was quite a pretty sample.
Right.
That's what I've learned. Small equals big, big equals small. And so you learn a little bit of the detail and then start to step out and look for those patterns within it. Just like Red Lake, the Dynasty project there has multiple strikes and dips. When we look at the core, we've got core angles varying from 0 to 90 to 45, all within the same area. And when we look at how the geophysics and everything lines up, there's definitely, east-west, north-south, northwest, southeast. And those sort of intersections is often where you get the big, I'm not going to call it a crack, I'm actually going to call it a tear. So it's actually it hosts a lot better mineralization or a lot higher grade mineralization. And that's usually within a broad host of low grade, which is what was defined by the resource that was done. But what we're finding is there's high grade shoots within that. And those high grade shoots make all the difference in the world from an economic standpoint. So I'm still at heart, I'm still a mine geologist. How do we make it into a mine?
Well, I like the sounds of that because you worked at a pretty important one there in Ontario in Red Lake, and always like to hear when you see the similarities. And you had the benefit of seeing the rocks at depth as well as from the drill hole.
Yeah, well, sometimes like looking at the core, some of the guys, the unexperienced guys look at it and say, "Oh, that's a tuff or something." I said, "No, that's a quartz vein that's been broken up." It's because you see it underground and it's got the same identical textures, identical.
Right.
There's more quartz veining there and less primary stratigraphy, I think, in some of the old logging.
Right. And I don't know if you want to, but if you want to share the screen, you have that ability. I've okayed that. But let's talk a little bit about your experience so far at Thundercloud. You've been on there. You've had a chance to look closely at the rocks at surface and the rocks in the drill core. And what are some of the things you're seeing that have you excited, Jim?
I mean, the alteration itself, it's full of biotite. Actinolite magnetite is something that, people don't talk too much about, but I've seen a bit of that. And that was in Red Lake in a lot of the different zones that we had there. Kind of have a mental block here right now.
Oh, no worries. You were talking about alteration.
Alteration, yeah.
Yep.
So we're getting lots of really good alteration. Say the biotite is extremely prevalent. Actually, today when I was reviewing some core too, I actually looked, there seems to be garnets and some more chloritic material that's spotty through the core. And that may mean that we're looking at some pillared basalts. So far, I haven't really been able to identify them, but I may have been able to identify some this morning when I was going through
good.
some of the core.
So you're always studying that rock, Jim. I know the feeling.
Well, all these ore bodies, the rock types and the stratigraphy, they're important from the standpoint that they're pre-existing structures, and some are more permeable, or you can penetrate them better than others. Some crack better than others, and it's the contrast between them that actually makes some of them more favorable to give you better ductility, better dilatancy. A good example, like in Red Lake, it's that they call the altered rock. So it's a little bit more plastic or rubbery, and then you've got your brittle basalts that break. So you've got something that's containing the breaking, and that's how the fluids basically stick within the contained cracks. That kind of an idea. I don't know if I explained that very well, but that's how my mind works.
No, you did. Well, maybe geologists might want you to use more complex words, but I like cracks and alteration, and basically what how I've described it when I've tried to sort of tell non-geologists what we do in this business is you're kind of looking around for things that are different than the country rock. And also when you're talking about those cracks, you're talking about the preparation of the rock for those gold-bearing fluids to make their way up deeper.
Yeah, no, exactly.
And when you see that alteration that you're talking about, that tells you that, that's what kind of a system you're looking at here, that you have those gold-bearing fluids altering the country rock.
Exactly. I mean, you can take a basalt that's been, or an ultramafic that's been altered by carbonate and sericite in it. It looks like a felsic tuff, but it's an altered mafic. I mean, I had trouble with that when I first started at Dickinson Goldcorp, and they're calling this stuff ultramafic. It looks like rhyolite. You know what I mean? So I think that's probably some of the kind of stuff I can see that other people wouldn't see from my experience. And there's definitely different kinds of alteration. There's some that doesn't bear gold, but it's very structurally important. And then there's the really folded and twisted areas where there's alteration, and that's where the gold is.
You tell these stories, and I've had the great honor of working with people that have worked with major mining companies and spent a lot of time in their experience. And the way that I find guys like you explain things, Jim, is I find a lot of geologists get really technical, and those with a lot of experience seem to want to break it down to a much simpler story.
I mean, you get used to working with everybody, and the big words don't mean a heck of a lot to anybody.
Right. And when you're and things that I focus on are, especially in epithermal or orogenic gold systems, are your structural story and your alteration and your mineralization. These are the things that sort of guide you to where to keep looking, if you will.
Exactly. And I'm very much a pattern guy. That's why I like doing structural analyses. You lay out where you think the cracks are, and here's an ore body, and here's some cracks that look like this. I think there's some cracks south of it or east of it or west of it that look similar. Here's a good target. Because geophysics doesn't do it all. There's rules of thumb you make, and they work most of the time, but not all the time. It's like traditionally a mag low at a high can be an anomaly. We're finding stuff that's actually in the mag high, but that doesn't mean there's not going to be other stuff somewhere, within the property that has those other sorts of signatures as well. So we need to keep an open mind to looking at things that don't necessarily have geophysical anomalies, but have very attractive structural stories to them.
Well, I think that if you sort of had to describe the success that the company had in their late 2022 drill program, is that they were looking at places where there was known high grade and associated geophysical anomalies.
Yeah.
I think that formula is working very good here, because the geophysics are probably picking up the sulfides, that are associated with the gold mineral.
Exactly, the pyrite for sure.
Right.
And then pyrite seems to be the main gold sulfide that we have. It's
Right.
fine grained pyrite. And the more,
So that in that context, the geophysics are very helpful.
yeah, no, exactly. Exactly. I mean, I've looked at where we've actually found the high grade, and I've found a number of areas that look very similar. And they're not, not a blasting high mag and a blasting low mag. They're usually somewhere in between but they're at a a slope. So when you draft up the geophysics, you're at a change from higher to lower. And that's usually where we find things.
So the geophysics are helpful. The structural story is helpful. And the alteration is helpful. And of course, the high grade mineralization is helpful.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's some decent regional maps, and having done the same sort of thing at Dickinson Goldcorp, I looked at where the granites are poking into the rock or where other intrusions are poking in, and look at it and say, well, here's probably where there's some movement, and it's because it's the timing of it's very close to synchronous. So you can basically start to pick apart a story and draw the cracks and say, well, if those cracks are there, this is what we should be looking for. So that's kind of been my approach at it anyway so far.
Well, I think that's a hell of a way to go about it. I think it's the right way to go about it. That's why
I appreciate that. Time will tell, right?
Right. Well, so far there's been a group of holes that were drilled this summer that are now in for assaying. And the next step will be to drill. I've had the benefit of a pre-interview. We did a chat yesterday, and I think that there's some good information from that chat that will be helpful to the audience. And that is planning the next group of holes. And your approach is, heard this many times before by good geologists, is that you're following structure and alteration. Is that sort of what will generate the next batch of holes, Jim, from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I've laid out 3 holes to go underneath the higher grade areas, and I've actually laid them out at an angle that, because I believe there's north, south, east, west, and northwest, southeast, we've actually laid them out at an angle that I believe they could potentially hit all of those different directionalities within the ore horizon, mineralized horizon, that sort of thing. So
yeah.
So we've laid out 3 of those that, they're up to 600 meters long. So that targets the deposit about 150 meters below the current resource that's been done.
Yeah.
And then also looking at patterns. I mean, we've looked at some of the IP. Ian, one of the geologists that's working on the property, he suggested some targets there. I like those as well. Those are still shallow targets. And the whole area south of us, there's a lot of numbers, decent assays from trenching and that sort of thing that really haven't been followed up, and some geophysical signatures that are similar too. So I'm hoping, or I believe, that there's potential for repeat of the low grade mineralization with high grade shoots within it. So like an actual separate body or separate bodies could be found within the area. It's we haven't really looked at very much of it.
Even to the west of the East Pelham, in what's called the West Pelham, there's been a moderate amount of drilling sort of on the outside of the geophysical anomaly.
Yeah, on the edge, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm really interested in a couple of holes that went into that more primary part of the geophysical anomaly, because I think that's got good potential as well, just in the immediate area around East Pelham.
Yeah, and I think we talked yesterday too that a couple of those holes, I think it was number 3, it was still in mineralization at the end of the hole.
Oh, you're talking about in the East Pelham. That's that.
In the East Pelham, yeah. So there's still stuff south of East Pelham that we haven't even looked at, and there could even be a north-south structure sitting in there that continues.
I'm glad.
Arm waving right now, so take it for what it's worth. But it's ideas that you have to test, right?
Exactly. And just because you're arm waving doesn't mean that it's not going to come true.
I'm not always right, but I've been right more than I've been wrong.
There you go.
I have been wrong, that's for sure.
I'm really intrigued by the fact that you brought up that third hole, because that had 2 things in it for me. That's the one that had that 3-meter intersection of 151 grams with a subinterval of 1.5 meters of 246 grams. But if you follow that hole, which is something that one of my old geologist mentors taught me, is to watch the distribution of gold in the drill core. And there's a lower zone that I think it was a 1.5 meter intersection of 65 grams. So you're already getting the indications that you could be looking at stacked lenses here.
Yeah, I mean, I think I showed you yesterday that on the sections we looked at that, I believe the two intersections are the same structure, but they're actually striking a little bit more east-west. So they're actually coming across the horizon. That's the lower grade horizon. So it's, basically you're looking at, we used to call them horsetails at the Campbell mine when you've got these different structures that feed into it, but they feed into it on an on echelon or even just a periodicity. And there's other structures in there striking and dipping different directions. And that's kind of where you get the real high grade, is where they come together.
And, that's classically what you look for in an orogenic gold system, is this complex sort of cracks and mineralized zones. So it's ticking off those great boxes as well.
Yeah, no, for sure.
And one of your planned holes is to go chasing the structure, is to go underneath that hole number 3, right?
That's correct. Actually, there's one will be west of it, one will be under it, and one of it will be east of it. And they're all three of them kind of coming in from the northwest to the southeast.
And testing
from the northeast to the southwest, pardon me.
And testing as much of those structures as you possibly can.
So we've got the structures up here, and we're just kind of, so that it's sitting like this, and it might have some different things in it. So we're kind of coming down and coming underneath it like that. Hands work very well for that.
Chasing the structural story is what you're
exactly, and trying to align the drill holes so that you're focused as much on strike and dip as you're focused on plunge. One of the lessons I learned at Eske, which was a strata-bound deposit, but if you drilled perpendicular to plunge, you got better numbers and better results than if you drilled perpendicular to strike. And what it did is it showed us where the stack lenses were, and we were able to figure out the details of stack lenses. And as much as that was, syngenetic, sort of a sedimentary deposit, the same kind of things happen in an epigenetic deposit where the lenses stack up on one another. So trying to find them, it's a little bit of, we can minimize the drilling if we approach this the right way.
Yeah, and well, the last round of drilling, or the round before this summer drilling, has really sort of given indications of how to tackle this beast from a geophysical perspective, and also from the mineralization. But I think where you come in a big way, Jim, is this adding the structural component and alteration to the vectoring in of the system.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, I think that's everything. I really think it's important.
Exactly. Well, as a significant shareholder of the company, I'm really glad you've joined the team, Jim, because I think your experience with Goldcorp in the past and is going to be very instrumental in moving this project forward.
Well, I hope so. I'm here to have some fun. I mean, I've been a little bit retired for the last 3 years, and I miss thinking about this stuff. Like, I do my best work when I'm at 4 a.m. when I'm trying to sleep.
Yeah. Well,
you can't get it out of your head,
That's I've had that problem before too. It's when you sort of, thoughts come to you and you're half asleep or asleep, and then it wakes you up and you can't stop thinking about it.
Exactly. So I'm having fun with it for sure. And
well, I'm glad
it's been great.
I'm glad Thundercloud has given you some reasons to wake up late at night and start doing some of that homework.
No, fair enough. It's just, geology's fun. I mean, the science has always been fun. And,
well, for me,
always learning.
For me, it's the hunt of the treasure.
Yeah,
It's
it is a treasure hunt, a jigsaw puzzle, or all kinds of words like that. Yeah.
I have my grandmother to thank for that. She used to go out panning for gold in near Squamish in Vancouver, and
Okay.
she'd
Yeah.
come home with these. When I was 4 or 5 years old, she'd come home with these vials of little specks of gold, and I thought it was magical, and I didn't really realize that she was sort of planting the seed for my treasure hunting career.
For sure.
Yeah.
I've known a few guys like that. I first started off in exploration in Savant Lake, and Allan Best. I don't know if anybody's heard his name, but he was a prospector there, and he had bottles full of panned gold, bottles like mason jars full of panned gold.
Wow. Well, it's what I think what gets us all up at night sometimes thinking about this stuff, Jim, when you're a lifelong treasure hunter.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Well, I really appreciate your experience there you had in Red Lake, and the approach that you're helping Dynasty take to move this project forward.
Yeah, I think we're gonna have some fun. We're gonna find some gold.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to close it off, Jim, and if you want to hang around, we can have a chat at the other end.
Sure, sounds good. All
All right. So there you go, folks. Dynasty Gold has caught my imagination since January when they found some spectacular high grade. And when I see a high grade system, I always want to try to understand what kind of system. And as I did my homework, you start looking around, and not too far away is the Red Lake mine, and that's an orogenic gold system. And so then I started to put my checklist together. Does this project have the right age of rocks? Is it in a greenstone belt? Does it have those cracks or faults that Jim and I were talking about? And then of course, does it have the mineralization? And it's ticking off all those boxes. And as I said to Jim, I'm really happy that the company's been able to bring him on board, because his understanding of the faulting and the alteration and the experience that he's had looking at that kind of rock at depth in the mine, and also from the drill core at Red Lake, I think is going to be really instrumental in bringing the Thundercloud project forward. As always, my shows are for information purposes only. I'm just trying to shine some light on what I see from my experience in this business. But it's always important to speak with your financial advisor about your risk profile and do the homework. Check out the company's website, and there's a new corporate presentation coming out in the not too distant future that Jim's been helping with. And I think that this will help you to understand the potential of what Dynasty Gold has already found, and hopefully continue in that trend. On that note, have a great day, and we will talk to you soon.